In last week's episode, the very first video, we discovered that from a technical standpoint, it's actually really easy to make dark chocolate. Aside from a stone grinder, all you need is cocoa butter, cocoa nibs, and sugar. If you haven't seen that video, check it out by clicking on the link above. And now for what might be a familiar scenario. We get our ingredients together, clean our strawberries, melt our chocolate, get our nuts together, pour, dip, whatever we're doing, only to discover that the product doesn't really seem to want to set. And when it does set, it sets in this crumbly phase that's a far cry from the crack, the gloss that we're after. That gloss and crack, incidentally, indicates a beautiful flavor delivery structure, and that's what we're after. All right, fellow chocolate lovers, what's the answer? You know it, it's lost its temper. It never actually was in temper in the first place. Tempering 101, the tabling method. The most well-known of all of the methods of tempering chocolate. I have no idea why, it's the messiest and the hardest, but that's where we're going to start today. Let's make a mess. The conclusion that I've come to after working with chocolate for such a long time is that it is really mysterious stuff. So when you look at the subject of chocolate tempering, you're going to find words like form V crystals, beta crystals, 6 types of crystals, and also tempering curve. All these sorts of words that kind of make me glaze over. And the reason is because the tools of our trade are a palette knife, a scraper, not a microscope. The way that I was first taught to think about chocolate, which has served me pretty well, is that there's 2 types of fat crystals. One is stable, meaning it sets at a stable temperature, and the other one, of which there's many, sets at fluctuating temperatures. If we take a look at this delightful slab of dark chocolate in front of me, we can see all of the fat migration, separation, it's crumbly in texture. So what we're interested in is crystallizing the stable fats referred to as form V so that that becomes the dominant texture of the chocolate. So let's get to it. We're going to start by taking 1 kilo of this chocolate, chopping it up and melting it between 40 and 45 degrees to ensure that most, if not all, of the fat crystals are melted. Ensuring, of course, that all utensils are bone dry, because as we know, chocolate and water just never got along very well. But more on that in a later video. Let's get started. Now, as far as utensils are concerned, what we need is scraper, knife, palette knife, and a silicone spatula. Now you can, of course, use a microwave for this process, for those of you that have one. Pulse it slowly, allowing several stages in between. So taking it out of the microwave and stirring it. We don't want to overheat the chocolate. That's the other enemy of the item. The beauty of untempered chocolate also, you're probably noticing, is that it cuts really easy. So there's always a silver lining, isn't there? And now we're going to turn on the induction cooker, which is beautiful because it cooks very slowly. I've turned the heat up slightly, but that's because I'm standing here stirring it. I would never leave it unattended. I'm just trying to speed the process up a little bit. You may have noticed that I put a little bit of cocoa butter, actually 5%, into the chocolate. Don't take any notice of that. The reason I do it is because when I conch my chocolate, I conch it 5% cocoa butter under, which definitely is a subject for a future video. There's a reason why I do that. And now I think it's time for glasses. And if you look closely at this now that it's at 43, you still can see isolated streaks of unmelted fat. Not a problem. Sorry, enough of the stable crystals have melted for me now to produce a tempered chocolate with this. Okay, for this part of the process, the tabling part, I'm going to pour 2/3 of the chocolate or thereabouts onto the table, and the trick is agitation whilst cooling. So the agitation is executed by scraping and then holding it against the, or cleaning it off the spatula. And note that I'm not spreading the mix right over the marble slab. This is really important because what will happen is it will cool too quickly and it won't have time to crystallize. Now, on the other hand, if I was doing, say, 10 kilos of chocolate versus 1 kilo, I'd be able to spread it right. In fact, I do. I spread it right across the whole slab without consequence because it's got so much heat in it that it can handle, and it'll move through the temperature down to 27, which is what we're after, very, very slowly. Now, as we start to create the crystals, you'll see the texture change. As I drag the palette knife off the surface of the, as I drag the palette knife off the surface of the chocolate, you'll see sort of elastic bubbles forming. I'm really hoping that the camera picks this up. There we go. Okay, so I'm guessing that that's at a good temperature. I'd best grab my thermometer to check it. It's a chocolate tempering competition. And here we go. I do have the luxury of an oversized marble slab or granite slab. What that means is I can drag chocolate off the edge without having a danger of it sort of falling underneath or in between the top of the freezer or the fridge. Yes, that's a bit of a handy thing. If you do this at home, you'll be grabbing chocolate and then feeding it into the bowl. It's a little bit more cumbersome, and I'm sorry I couldn't bring myself to do that. One thing to mention about this, if I put the chocolate back into the container and it's still, say, about 34, not above 34, then there's a very good chance that if you just let it sit and stir every few minutes as it comes down, it could well be in temper, and it's worth checking. They call this residence time. So sometimes when you first take it off the slab and mix it back with the warm chocolate, it's not quite ready, but there's nothing more to do except wait. So that's a thing worth knowing. Now, when you look at the testing, it'll sort of all become a little bit clearer. All right, our chocolate is now at 30 degrees. So like every good chocolatier, I'm going to do a test before I do anything with the chocolate. So what it's going to involve is dipping a spoon into the chocolate and watching how quickly it sets with the timer running. The time is really important. That'll tell us a lot of information. Here we go. And now while we wait, what I'm going to do is get the spoon and run a hot blow dryer over it and then dip it, and we'll see what happens. We're at the 1 minute mark. And as you could see, I think at least, the chocolate has already formed an even skin at 1 minute and 20 seconds. We're now at the 2 minute mark, so our first spoon has been dipped for 2 minutes. Our second spoon, which was heated up, is at the 1 minute mark, and it is still totally fluid. Look at that. And if we look at the chocolate coming off the spoon, look how it just forms into a nice, even shape. If it was untempered, it wouldn't do that. It would be brittle. And the only reason this will turn brittle is if it's cold. Also, take note of the temperature. So it's 18.7. I would usually be working at around 20 degrees. I have not had to put this chocolate into the fridge to, I guess, fool myself that it's actually tempered. So in closing, a couple of points to consider might be, if you're doing this at home, then make sure you have absolutely everything ready before you attempt to take on the tempering process, so that when your chocolate's tempered, you can just go and dip your strawberries and have them done. Now, on that subject, something like strawberries, you'd hear people say, oh, you don't put chocolate in the fridge. It's half true. So in the case of strawberries, where it's a thin shell of chocolate, dip the strawberry, just like the spoon, and place it outside at ambient temperature. 20 degrees is great. Don't work in a warm environment. That's a nightmare. Now, if it's something like a thick product, like a shell of any chocolate, I should say dark chocolate, but it doesn't matter. So if it's a thicker chocolate that cools slower, because the internals are at 30 degrees, the room temperature is at 20, and it will cool that gradually, that it itself will go out of temper. So in that case, either put it in front of an air conditioner or put it in the fridge, one or the other. And this is really a subject for a future video, but you'll see the way it behaves as it comes out of the mold. That's if you're using a Perspex mold, not a silicon one. Both are great, by the way. I think I spotted a huge elephant in the room. Well, Floyd, that's all very fine, but most of us don't have marble slabs at home. Well, that's a really good point. Thanks for the comment. Okay, in our next few videos, we're going to explore some ways of tempering without using a marble slab that are much, much easier and much cleaner. So if you like the video, please press the like button. Google apparently loves that. Subscribe, bell notifications so you get notified when new videos come up. So that's it for now. And just to finish off, we're at 8 minutes and 23 seconds and our warmed spoon still hasn't set. Now, why would that be? Bye.